Hello, it's Mrs F here. This is my video on the strengths and weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution. I'm following the Edexcel specification, but you'll find that a lot of the content is also relevant to other exam boards. This is my second lesson on the origins of the Weimar Republic. Last time I looked at the legacy of the First World War. In this lesson, I'm looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution. You may remember from last lesson that a temporary council of people's representatives had been established. This was a group of 6 moderate politicians who had been chosen to try and stop anarchy or a potential takeover by the communists. The National Assembly was designed to replace this temporary arrangement. Before the war, Germany was not very democratic, and the Kaiser ruled as a virtual dictator. The Weimar Constitution aimed to establish one of the most democratic systems in the world. The elections for the National Assembly took place on the 19th of January 1919. They were very successful, with 82% of the electorate turning out to vote, which is a very high turnout, and shows that people were really interested in the future of their country. It was also a success because it was the moderate parties, rather than the extremist political parties, who gained most of the seats. The Social Democratic Party won 40% and the Centre Party won 20%. The National Assembly met for the first time in February 1919. Because there was so much unrest and violence in Berlin, in fact in January of 1919 there was an attempted communist takeover, it was decided that the National Assembly would meet in the peaceful town of Weimar, which is about 250 kilometres from Berlin. It took them 6 months to agree on the new constitution, by 262 votes to 75. The new republic took its name from the town Weimar. The Weimar Constitution had a series of checks and balances to ensure that no one person or one group could have too much power. The president of the Weimar Republic was pretty powerful. He got to choose the chancellor, which is the German equivalent of prime minister. However, he did have to ensure that the chancellor had support from the majority of the Reichstag. In addition, the president could dismiss the Reichstag, call new elections, and even assume, it must be getting near to lunchtime and I'm thinking about eating. He could even assume control of the army. However, the German president was subject to elections every 7 years when the German people could choose a new president if they were unhappy with the job that he was doing. It was the Chancellor who got to decide which new laws would be put forward. However, under normal circumstances, these would only become law if the majority of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat voted for them. The Reichstag was probably the most democratic part of the constitution, and fittingly, it was the more powerful house of the German parliament. For example, it had control over taxation. The Reichsrat could delay any new laws passed by the Reichstag, but the Reichstag could then overrule the Reichsrat if it had a 2/3 majority. The last thing it's worth pointing out is that Germany was a federal state, and the states actually retained a number of powers by local government. Each of the 18 regions of Germany kept its own local parliament, and these controlled key services such as police, courts, and schools. So let's turn now to the strengths and weaknesses of the new German constitution. First of all, it was very democratic. Elections for the Reichstag took place every 4 years, and all Germans over the age of 20 could vote. This was much more democratic than things had been under the Kaiser, and this was also more democratic than in Britain, where women had to be 30 to vote, but men only had to be 21. Another advantage of the Weimar Constitution was the system of checks and balances I've already discussed, which was designed so that no individual could gain too much power. Thirdly, the Weimar Constitution had a Bill of Rights, which guaranteed every German freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and equality under the law. One of the key weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution was its voting system of proportional representation. Ironically, it was actually very fair and democratic. But in reality, it didn't work very well in Germany at the time. Proportional representation meant that if a political party gained 20% of the vote, they would get 20% of the seats in the Reichstag. However, a big problem with proportional representation is it meant that many small parties won seats in the Reichstag. There was actually 29 parties in total during the 1920s, and because of this, usually no single party had a clear majority. The only way that governments could be formed was if several parties joined together as coalitions. In order to get things done, coalition partners had to compromise, which resulted in a lack of clear, strong policies, which is not really what you want when Germany was in big trouble during the early 1920s. Coalitions frequently argued and fell apart. There were 9 coalition governments between 1919 and 1923. Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution was another feature which, although made sense in theory, didn't really work out in practice. It was a good idea in theory because it was designed to allow quick decision-making in a crisis, and the Weimar Republic did face a number of threats in the early years of its existence. And as we've already heard, proportional representation meant a lack of strong single-party governments. So the solution to this was Article 48. It said that in a crisis, the Chancellor could ask the President to pass a necessary law by decree, which meant that they didn't need the support of the Reichstag. The problem with this is that Article 48 was abused. By around 1930, the Chancellor came to rely on the President to pass laws rather than relying on votes in the Reichstag. This made the Weimar Constitution seem weak, and it encouraged people to think that Germany would be better off with a single, all-powerful leader. So with the end of the second lesson, we have finished looking at the origins of the Weimar Republic, and next lesson we'll start looking at the early challenges of the Weimar Republic, in particular focusing in the stabbed-in-the-back theory I mentioned in the first lesson, and the key terms of the Treaty of Versailles. I hope that you found this video useful. If you have, please check out the video that I post next week.